I noticed something off the moment I walked into Grandma's apartment that morning. The mail was stacked differently. There was a subtle tension in the air, and I could tell she had been trying not to worry me. But I had learned her little tales over the years, the way she fiddled with her ring when something was wrong, the slight pause before answering questions. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. She looked up at me, trying to smile, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Morning, Michael. Everything's fine," she said, but the words didn't match her expression. As she busied herself with the dishes, I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. For the past few weeks, I had noticed subtle hints, unfamiliar phone calls she seemed nervous about, letters that didn't make sense, relatives dropping by unexpectedly. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking it was normal family business, but something about it now felt deliberate, orchestrated. I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind racing. I remembered last Sunday when one of her distant cousins called, asking about her well-being in an oddly calculating tone. The conversation had seemed casual, but there was something underneath, a faint threat I hadn't been able to place at the time. Now I realized it wasn't vague, it was intentional. They were planning something, and Grandma was the target. I tried to shake off the feeling of helplessness. I can't just stand by, I thought. She's lived her life with dignity. She's worked hard, saved wisely, and now someone thinks her age gives them the right to take everything from her. Her eyes met mine as she handed me a cup of coffee. There was a slight tremble in her hand, almost imperceptible. That tremble told me more than any words ever could. I realized then that she was scared, but she didn't want me to see it. I clenched my fist quietly, feeling an unfamiliar mix of anger and protectiveness surge through me. I started thinking about what I needed to do. Observing, listening, documenting, anything to prevent them from manipulating her. My mind wandered through scenarios, letters disappearing, sudden claims of incompetence, subtle psychological pressure. I had to be proactive. I had to be ready. Even in the brief silence, the apartment seemed to echo the tension. I could almost hear the distant relatives moving in their own world, plotting behind closed doors, oblivious to how alert I had become. I realized that I would have to anticipate their moves before they could act. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about protecting someone I loved. I began to scan the room for anything unusual. The stack of letters on the counter caught my eye, particularly a few envelopes from legal-sounding offices. I picked them up discreetly, careful not to alarm Grandma. She was humming softly in the background, oblivious or pretending to be, but I could tell she was trying to maintain normalcy. I flipped through the letters, my heart racing. There it was, mention of relatives questioning her mental competence, subtle suggestions that she was too old to manage her affairs. I read and reread the words, each time feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. How could anyone think they had the right to undermine her like this? I sat back, my thoughts spinning. I had always known that some of the family was greedy, but I hadn't imagined they would be this blatant. It was one thing to have differences, disputes over minor matters, but this was a direct attack on everything she had built. My mind flashed back to memories of her teaching me to save wisely, to plan for the future, to value every decision I made. And now, those lessons were under threat by people who had no real connection beyond blood. I felt a surge of determination. I won't let them, I thought, not while I can act. I began mentally listing steps. First, monitor their actions, any visit, any phone call, any suspicious letter. Second, document everything, photos, recordings if necessary, notes of conversations. Third, find allies, neighbors, friends, anyone who could corroborate Grandma's ability to make decisions. I realized that time was critical. The longer I waited, the more leverage they could gain. Every movement Grandma made reminded me of her vulnerability. The way she handled the cups, carefully, deliberately, as if trying to keep her life in order. It was almost heartbreaking seeing someone so capable reduced to worrying about distant relatives' greed. My protective instinct kicked in, stronger than ever. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my thoughts. This was more than just planning, it was a commitment. I couldn't fail her. My mind circled back to the letters, the cold language, the insidious suggestion she was incapable. I imagined the relatives smiling to themselves, thinking they could manipulate her. They hadn't counted on me noticing, hadn't realized I was watching, thinking, analyzing. As I sipped my coffee, I resolved quietly to act. This was the beginning of a fight I couldn't ignore. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be moments of frustration and fear. But I also knew that doing nothing wasn't an option. Grandma's life, her dignity, her hard-earned security, it all depended on me stepping up. And in that quiet morning light, with the faint hum of the city outside, I promised myself I would protect her, no matter what it took. The first alarm had sounded. The next morning, I decided to check the mailbox before going into Grandma's apartment. My heart was still heavy from yesterday, and every step felt tense, like I was walking on thin ice. I didn't want to confront anything without knowing what I was up against. I had learned early on that patience and observation were my best tools. When I opened the mailbox, a thick envelope caught my eye. It had no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Careful, deliberate, the kind someone uses when they want to intimidate without being overt. I slipped it into my pocket and walked upstairs, my mind racing. Inside, Grandma was tending to her small garden by the window. She smiled faintly when she saw me, but her eyes betrayed worry. "Morning, Michael. Everything's okay?" she said softly, but I could tell she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I placed the envelope on the table and opened it cautiously. Inside were documents implying that certain relatives had begun formally discussing her ability to manage her finances. There were suggestions that she might need a guardian. The language was careful, almost polite, but the intent was unmistakable. I felt a surge of anger that I struggled to contain. How dare they even consider this, I thought. They don't know her like I do. They don't know the sharpness in her mind, the way she's always been careful with every decision. And now they act as if age erases all of that. I paced the apartment, running my hands through my hair, trying to process everything. I couldn't confront them recklessly. That would only give them ammunition. I needed a plan, a way to assert that Grandma was competent and that their claims were baseless. Her eyes followed me nervously. "Do you think they'll try something, Michael?" she asked quietly. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to remain calm. They might, I thought, but we'll handle it. I spent the rest of the morning mentally reviewing every interaction with these relatives over the past months. Odd phone calls, sudden visits, small comments about her being too old, or hints about needing assistance she didn't ask for. They were all pieces of a puzzle, and now the picture was clear. I realized that confronting one of them directly might send a signal that we were aware and watching. I needed to gauge their intent first, to understand their strategy. The apartment felt heavier now, the quiet hum of the city outside amplifying my thoughts. Every decision I made had to be calculated. By mid-afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind and observe. I needed to see who had been around, who might be visiting Grandma under the guise of casual concern. The streets of our neighborhood were familiar, lined with townhouses and small gardens, and yet I felt a tension I hadn't noticed before. Every passerby could be a messenger or spy. Every casual greeting carried potential implications. As I rounded the corner, I spotted him, one of the cousins I had suspected from the beginning. He was leaving a nearby building, glancing around as if checking for someone. His movements were deliberate, cautious, and my instincts told me he was aware of me noticing. I felt a chill run down my spine. So it begins, I thought. I followed at a discreet distance, keeping to the shadows. My mind raced with scenarios. If I approached him directly, he could deny everything, claim misunderstanding. But ignoring him might give him free rein to escalate his plans. I had to measure my steps carefully.
After a few blocks, he seemed to sense my attention. He slowed, glanced over his shoulder, and I froze behind a parked car. He knows I'm paying attention, I realized. This changes things. I turned and started walking the long way back to Grandma's apartment, thinking. I had to anticipate their next move before it reached her. My internal checklist formed quickly. Monitor all incoming letters, record phone calls discreetly, note all visits, and document even minor comments. Every small action now mattered. Back at the apartment, Grandma asked about my walk. I gave a vague answer, hiding the encounter. I didn't want to alarm her, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on me. I can't let them intimidate her, I thought. I won't. I spent the evening reviewing the envelope's documents, making notes on every detail that could be used later. The relatives' intentions were clearer now, their plan more audacious than I had imagined. They weren't simply curious, they were scheming to take advantage of her age and possibly to discredit her entirely. The thought of their audacity made my stomach tighten. They won't get away with this, I reminded myself, feeling a growing determination. Every manipulation, every hidden comment, every attempt to undermine her, none of it would succeed if I remained vigilant. That night, as I helped Grandma settle with her tea and evening routine, I kept thinking about the confrontation. Not a direct clash yet, but the first signs of an open threat. My mind circled around strategies, potential allies, and ways to ensure she remained safe. The fight was beginning, and I realized I would need every ounce of focus and resolve to protect her from the people who should have been family.
The morning was quiet, too quiet. I had grown used to the subtle unease of the past few weeks, but today felt different, like the calm before a storm. I sat at Grandma's kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of me, and studied the stack of letters again. My eyes lingered on one envelope I hadn't opened fully the day before. Inside, I found copies of correspondence between distant relatives and what appeared to be a legal office. They weren't just discussing her age casually anymore. They were planning steps to formally question her ability to manage her finances. The words were polite, sterile even, but beneath the surface, I could feel the intent to take control. I ran my hands through my hair, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down. They're serious, I thought. This isn't idle chatter or greedy whispers. They're moving forward, legally. And they've underestimated me. Grandma hummed softly as she organized her small collection of bills and letters. I noticed the slight hesitation in her movements, the way she paused over each envelope. She wanted to appear calm, but I could see it in the tension in her hands, in the faint tremble of her wrist. Age had nothing to do with it. This was fear of betrayal. I began to replay the interactions I had observed with the cousins. Every casual question about her health, every suggestion about her ability to manage things, every subtle comment had a purpose. The pieces were falling into place. They weren't just opportunistic, they were strategic. My mind circled with thoughts of what this meant. If they take her finances, they take her independence. If they succeed in convincing anyone she's incapable, it becomes permanent. I can't let that happen. I felt a mix of anger, anxiety, and determination. These were my family too, and yet their betrayal cut deeper than any strangers could. I couldn't let them succeed, and I had to act carefully. Planning, observation, strategy, everything mattered. I reviewed the letters again, highlighting dates, names, and subtle suggestions they had made about her competence. Each line reinforced the reality. This was deliberate, and if unchecked, it could dismantle everything Grandma had built. I felt a growing urgency. Time was slipping away, and every hour counted. I spent the afternoon piecing together the timeline of their interactions. Calls, visits, casual remarks, all small maneuvers leading up to the formal plan. I realized that they weren't simply trying to bully her. They were trying to build a case, to create evidence that she might be incapable.
The thought made my blood boil. I moved around Grandma's apartment, checking where she kept her important documents. Filing cabinets, drawers, and the safe in the corner. All spots they might exploit if they knew. I made a mental map of each location and started thinking about how to secure them without making her feel imprisoned in her own home. Every so often, I caught her watching me, perhaps sensing the shift in my focus. "Don't worry, Grandma," I thought quietly. "I won't let them take anything from you." I remembered the conversations I had overheard months ago, careless words from these relatives about her being too old, comments about letting someone else handle things. At the time, I had dismissed them as empty talk, but now they were pieces of a larger, more sinister puzzle. The legal implications were beginning to take shape in my mind. If they filed documents to question her capacity, it would trigger a series of court proceedings, potentially making her dependent on their decisions. I can't let that happen. Every move I made now had to preempt their actions, anticipate the arguments they would use, and protect her autonomy. I felt a mix of frustration and determination. I wanted to confront them immediately, to show them they were wrong, but I knew that doing so recklessly could backfire. Instead, I focused on gathering evidence, documenting everything, and planning the next steps carefully. Even as the sun began to dip behind the buildings outside, casting long shadows across the apartment, I stayed at the table with the letters spread before me. Each line, each date, each name was a clue, a signal of what they intended, and I was resolved. I would not let them manipulate or intimidate her. Not quietly, not indirectly. I would protect her, and I would ensure that their hidden scheme failed. By nightfall, I had formed a strategy in my mind. Monitor every interaction, document every suspicious move, and be ready to counter their legal maneuvers. Grandma trusted me, even if she didn't fully understand the danger. I felt the weight of that trust pressing on my shoulders, and it only made my resolve stronger. The fight was no longer abstract. It was real, immediate, and it was up to me to navigate the next moves carefully. Every thought, every plan, every step was now part of a silent war to protect someone I loved more than anything.
The next morning, I woke up early, already thinking about the next steps. I hadn't slept well. My mind had been racing with possibilities and potential threats. Every interaction with Grandma's distant relatives replayed in my head, each one a possible clue to their intentions. The quiet of the apartment felt heavier than usual, almost like it was pressing me to act. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming in my cup, and began mapping out a plan. Observation was the first step, but it wouldn't be enough. I needed to anticipate their moves, document their intentions, and create a strategy that would hold if they tried to escalate. Every phone call, every casual visit, every seemingly innocent question had to be accounted for. I made a list: monitor relatives' actions, secure important documents, track correspondence, and prepare a timeline of events. I even considered reaching out to neighbors who could witness unusual behavior. My mind moved like a chessboard, placing each piece in its potential position. I realized that preparation was my weapon, and the better I prepared, the harder it would be for them to succeed. Grandma moved quietly around the apartment, humming softly as she tended to her plants. She seemed unaware of the depth of my thoughts, but I knew she sensed the tension. "I'll protect you," I thought, almost like a silent vow. Not because she couldn't protect herself, but because she deserved to live without fear of betrayal. I recalled how she had raised me, how she had always emphasized careful planning, forethought, and integrity. Those lessons were now guiding me as I considered the family dynamics. It wasn't just about money. It was about control, respect, and ensuring that no one could take advantage of her age to claim what wasn't theirs. I thought about the letters I had gone through, the hidden intentions of relatives, and the legal implications. There was no room for error. Any misstep could be catastrophic. I began to imagine possible scenarios. If a relative tried to intervene legally, if they attempted to intimidate her directly, if they tried to manipulate her into signing something.
For each scenario, I needed a plan, a countermeasure. By midday, I began organizing the apartment, making sure that all important documents were easily accessible but safe from interference. Bills, account statements, legal papers. I mapped their locations and thought about how to discreetly monitor any attempts to access them. Grandma noticed my meticulousness, giving me a small, knowing smile. "Don't worry, Michael," she said quietly, but I could tell she appreciated my vigilance, even if she didn't fully understand the scope of the threat. I spent the afternoon reviewing the timeline of interactions, arranging each phone call, visit, and conversation into a coherent sequence. Every small comment from the relatives now seemed deliberate, each word a calculated move. I realized they had been preparing this plan for months, but I had the advantage of insight. I knew what to expect. The strategy forming in my mind was layered. First, surveillance, track interactions and document everything. Second, communication, prepare letters and notes to counter any manipulations. Third, allies, identify neighbors and friends who could attest to Grandma's capability and well-being. Finally, legal support, consult with a lawyer to ensure that all steps were compliant and defensible. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. They may have underestimated me, I thought. They didn't realize I was watching, thinking, planning, and now I had the initiative. Even as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the apartment, I remained at the table, lost in thought. Each scenario, each potential move by the relatives, each small detail of the letters and interactions was carefully analyzed. My internal monologue circled constantly: anticipation, prevention, readiness. Grandma settled into her chair with her knitting, oblivious to the intensity of my planning. I envied her calm, but I knew I couldn't afford to rest. My mind was a map of possibilities, and each step I considered had to be precise. By nightfall, I had finalized the first draft of my plan, observing, documenting, securing, and preparing legal measures. I could almost feel the relatives' attempts to maneuver around me, and I smiled quietly to myself. Not this time, I thought, not while I'm paying attention. The apartment was quiet, but the war was far from over. I had built my defenses, mapped my strategy, and fortified my resolve. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin, confronting the first active threat without giving them a chance to act. Every thought, every plan, every precaution was now a part of the silent defense I had created to protect the person I loved most.
The next morning, I called the lawyer I had been researching for weeks. I kept my voice calm, measured. There was no reason to rush or reveal panic. The attorney specialized in elder law and had dealt with cases of financial manipulation before. I laid out the situation carefully, explaining the documents I had found, the letters, emails, and the timeline of visits and phone calls. As I spoke, a sense of relief mingled with tension. Relief because I finally had professional support. Tension because the process ahead would be formal, slow, and deliberate. I knew the relatives would likely fight back if they discovered any intervention, so timing was crucial. Every step needed to be strategic. Grandma was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. She didn't need to know the details yet. She simply needed reassurance that her life and independence were not at risk. I kept my internal monologue steady, focused on the plan. Organize evidence, document interactions, and prepare legal filings before they could act. By mid-morning, I had the documents ready, scanned copies, organized in chronological order, annotated with notes highlighting inconsistencies and manipulative behavior. I reviewed every line meticulously. Each email, each letter, each suspicious visit formed a pattern that left little room for doubt. The relatives were attempting to undermine Grandma's capacity to manage her own affairs. I felt a wave of determination. They may think they can manipulate her, I thought. They may think her age gives them the right to take what's hers. But they've underestimated me. They've left a trail, and now it's my turn to use it. The lawyer advised filing a formal notice to the relatives, asserting Grandma's competence and detailing the potential legal consequences of any interference. I listened carefully, committing each step to memory.
Every form, every deadline, every procedure had to be perfect. Mistakes could give them a loophole, and there would be no second chances. By late afternoon, I began drafting the notice with the lawyer's guidance. The words were precise, legally binding, and firm. No threats, just facts, evidence, and the assertion that any further attempts to manipulate Grandma would be met with legal action. I reread the draft several times, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. That evening, I handed the draft to the lawyer and watched as they finalized it. The sense of closure I had been craving started to form. Tomorrow, the relatives would receive an official notice that Grandma was fully competent, fully aware, and fully protected under the law. Their plan, carefully orchestrated for months, would be met with a formal, irrefutable obstacle. I sat quietly with Grandma later, making sure she felt safe and cared for. I didn't tell her the details. There was no need to burden her, but I reassured her gently. Everything's going to be fine, I thought, even if I didn't speak it aloud. Night fell, and I stayed awake, reviewing every document once more. The patterns, the letters, the timeline, they were all in order. Every small manipulation had been documented. Every subtle attempt to intimidate or confuse accounted for. I felt a sense of moral victory, not just because I had prepared legally, but because I had protected her dignity. The next morning, the notice was sent. I imagined the relatives opening it, reading the facts and evidence, realizing their plan had been uncovered and formally blocked. I pictured their shock, their frustration, and a small, quiet satisfaction filled me. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. Over the following days, I monitored the situation closely. No more unannounced visits, no more manipulative letters. The relatives seemed to retreat, unsure of how to proceed against the wall of documented evidence and legal preparation I had established. Grandma returned to her normal routines, her independence intact. I spent hours reflecting on the experience. It had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and at times terrifying. But I had learned the depth of loyalty and the strength that comes from protecting someone you love. My internal monologue often returned to the same thought. I did this. I protected her. In the quiet moments, I watched Grandma tend to her plants, laugh softly at a memory, and sip her tea. She was safe, her dignity intact, her life hers to live. And I knew that no distant relative, no matter how cunning or patient, could take that from her again. The war had ended, at least for now. The documents, the planning, the careful observation, all of it had worked. I had preserved what mattered most, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe, knowing that justice had quietly, firmly been served.